Hello, everybody. A very good morning. And how long is this session supposed to go? Please remind me. About 45 minutes or so? Yeah. All right. Well, my name is George Leef. I actually hold two jobs. Since 1999, I've been working for the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, which is a think tank in Raleigh. We focus on higher education issues. My other job is located not too far from here up in Wake Forest. I'm one of the announcers on WCPE, the classical station. In fact, I'm giving up my usual announcing this morning. I have a program called Classical Cafe, because I thought, well, I need a break and I'd like to talk about higher education policy with you folks. So let's get on with that. I'll also let you know that one other little thing I've done. I think Chris knows about this. I've written a couple of books, most recently a novel. And if anyone is interested in knowing about that novel, which contains a lot of my thinking on what's going wrong in the country, education included, I have some information there, and you might find it to be a good read at some point. A lot of people have told me it's a pretty good airplane book. So that's my pitch. Now, how did I get where I am? Long ago, I decided going to law school would be a good idea, back in the mid-70s. So I did that, went to Duke. And afterward, I decided, I don't really want to get into the legal profession. I would be a square peg in a lot of round holes in the legal profession. So I eventually found my way into teaching and wound up teaching at a small college in about the middle of Michigan, Midland, Michigan. I didn't really have ideal credentials, but with a law degree, they wanted somebody who could teach business law, so I taught that, and economics, and logic, and a few other courses for a number of years. And I became rather disillusioned with higher education. When I went to college, went to a liberal arts school back in the late 60s, early 70s, standards were pretty tough. Most of the students knew they had to work pretty hard to stay in school, otherwise they'd flunk out. There were a few goof-offs, but for the most part, it was a pretty rigorous, solid education with a solid curriculum. Then when I got into teaching, starting in 1980, I found that the students were quite disappointing. Many of them were really pretty weak in academic preparation. They didn't read well, they didn't write well. I was shocked to find that on their papers, they were making grammatical mistakes that you wouldn't have expected out of a fourth grader back when I was in fourth grade. They couldn't get, meaning the there, and there. They goofed that up, for instance. Moreover, a lot of them were just there to have fun. They weren't interested in learning. They were party animals all the time. So I was kind of disappointed in the students, but I had some good ones, so I stuck it out until 1989, when I was called on the carpet, summoned to the dean's office, and told that I was not being a very good team player. And that was because a lot of the students were unhappy with my grading. I continued to grade them as I thought they had earned, and if they earned D's and F's, that's what I put down. Well, I was told that I was not being a good team player. Those students could take my classes elsewhere. They could go to Saginaw Valley and take business law, where they covered less stuff in more time. So I was costing the school revenue, and that was not a good thing. So I was told I had to make my courses more user-friendly. And at that point, I said, well, I don't think I like this any longer, so I said, don't renew my contract, and left. Then, about 10 years later, there was an opening at what was then called the Pope Center for Higher Education Policy in Raleigh. And they were looking for somebody who had some higher education experience and also a frame of mind that was skeptical about what was going on in higher education. The man behind it, Mr. John William Pope, was a UNC graduate way back in 1948. Then he was chosen as a trustee of UNC in about 1993, I think. And when he looked at his alma mater, he was very disappointed in what was becoming of it. So he said to the guy who was running the John Locke Foundation, we need to focus on higher education in the state. So they set up a project to do that. And in 1999, they wanted to make it a full-time thing, and they were looking for somebody, and they hired me. So I moved to Raleigh and been doing this ever since. Now, when I started working with, we changed the name to the Martin Center, by the way, back in 2017. So I'll refer to it as the Martin Center, named after former Governor James G. Martin. When I started looking at lots of writing about higher education, I realized that my observations about what was happening in higher education were being echoed by many other people. Two big points. It was getting more and more expensive, and the academic standards were going down, down, down. And I started to wonder, well, why would that be? And I came to the conclusion eventually that it was because of one thing chiefly, government intervention, the federal government. So let's review the history of that. Under the United States Constitution, the federal government has no role whatsoever to play in education. That was one of the many things that the founders thought would best be reserved to the states and or the people. And the 10th Amendment says that if it's not allocated to the federal government, powers are not expressly given to the federal government, it is under the 10th Amendment something to be left to the states and or the people respectively. So the federal government had nothing to do with college education for a very long time. That changed in 1944 with the passage of what was commonly referred to as the GI Bill. And the idea behind the GI Bill, or one aspect of the GI Bill anyway, was that returning combat veterans should be given something. And one of the things they were given was money for college. So that began in 1944. A lot of the veterans got this money and decided they would go to college with it. And politicians thought this will be good. They'll gain more skills, and also they won't become unemployed. That was one of the main reasons. People thought, well, there's all these servicemen coming back from the war, there'll be massive unemployment, so let's get them off into college for a while so they won't all become unemployed at once. And as it turns out, they wouldn't become unemployed. There was no reason to think that that was going to be the case anyway. Nevertheless, the door was now opened ajar a little bit for government intervention. At first, it was just combat veterans who were eligible for the GI Bill benefits. That didn't last too long. By the time of the Korean War, that had been expanded to veterans. Didn't have to be a combat veteran. They just said any veteran is now going to be eligible for these college benefits. And in 1952, with the Korean War going on, Congress made a change. And here was what was going on. It was evident that quite a fair number of the people taking advantage of the GI Bill benefits were getting scammed. They were signing up for and paying out their benefits to scammy educational opportunities, fly-by-night places that would say, we will teach you something and pay us your GI Bill benefits, and then there would be little or no actual education involved in that. So Congress put on its thinking cap and said, well, how do we stop this from happening? And here's what the solution was. We will limit government student funding, student aid benefits, only to those colleges that are accredited. And that was actually not a bad solution, because back in 1952, accredited colleges clearly were all pretty good. The accrediting institutions, of which there were 6 at the time, 6 regional accrediting institutions, Southern Association here in the Southeastern, Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. Well, they would say, if you want to be a member of our association and be accredited by us, you have to have certain things that we regard as essential to a higher education institution. You have to have a real library. You have to have actual professors with reasonably good qualifications. You have to have a mission statement. You have to have reasonably sound financing. So accreditation became the touchstone for eligibility for government benefits. That was not a bad solution back then. But as we're going to see time and time again throughout our time together today, there were unanticipated consequences from doing that. One of the unanticipated consequences would be that over time, accreditation would lose its bite. Accreditation would be undermined as it became the gatekeeper for government eligibility for government institutions to accept all this money. So then the next step in the government's interventions, 1958, Congress passes the National Defense Act. And what this provided for was government benefits if you wanted to study math or science in college. That was, of course, sparked by Sputnik in 1957. There was a national furor over the Russians are getting ahead of us, the communists are in space before us. And so, like politicians always have to do, they thought, we better do something, or at least we need to look like we're doing something. So they passed a law saying, we'll give you extra money if you go to college and study math or science. Now, there wasn't really any need to do that, and it didn't do any good, but it didn't do much harm either. The benefits were limited only to pretty serious people who wanted to study what was then very serious stuff. So that was okay. Didn't do much harm. But again, the door had been pushed a little bit further open, more government intervention. Then, the big watershed event occurred in 1965. Lyndon Johnson was president. Lyndon Johnson was a former teacher. He was a New Deal advocate going way back to the 1930s. And he saw more education as a way to advance his war on poverty. So Johnson pushed for and got the Higher Education Act of 1965. This opened the door wide to government meddling in higher education. The idea was that the federal government would back private loans. Anybody who wanted to go to college, get a private loan, and the government would back those loans. If the student didn't pay, the government would fork over the money. Now, they had to keep the interest rate down to fairly low levels in order to qualify for this government backing, and they did. And this led to a burgeoning college lending industry. Lots and lots of companies got in on this, all under the umbrella of one big government-sponsored entity called Sallie Mae, the Student Loan Marketing Association, which bought up lots of these loans and became a very, very big player in Congress. They kept saying to their advocates in Congress, kept telling the politicians, this is good, we need more of this. Let's make the lending easier and more generous so more students will go to college. And it sure worked out for them. the number of students going to college went up, 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 up steadily. If you go back to years before World War II, only about 10% of Americans thought college was really necessary. And the country did not lack for brilliant people, but many of them didn't go to college. They learned their skills elsewhere without sitting in college classrooms. Mostly they apprenticed themselves. Lots of good lawyers didn't go to law school. Lots of scientists, they learned their science without sitting in a college classroom. There are other ways to learn things. But now, more and more of them were going to college to learn their trade. So we've opened the door wide. More and more are going to college. And what is happening to the nature of those students who are coming into college? Well, a lot of them less and less academically prepared. It used to be that just the relatively few really eager students would go to college. Now, with more and more going, we're dipping further and further into the talent pool. More and more of the students who are enrolling in college are relatively weakly prepared, like the ones I found when I taught back starting in 1980, the ones whose academic preparation was sketchy and whose interest in studying was minimal. So that's an unintended consequence. Suddenly, the nature of the student body is shifting away from really dedicated students to moderately dedicated students, and more are undedicated students. And how do schools react to that? Well, college leaders used to, in the old days, say, we have rigorous standards at our school. We're going to flunk out students who don't perform well. That used to be the mindset amongst college leaders. But now, they have to make a choice. If they keep their standards rigorous, that means they're going to wash out a lot of these people who are flooding them with money. Many of those college presidents decided, we'd rather have the money. We can let our standards slide. We'd rather have happy students. And that explains my unhappy experience when I was called into the dean's office and being informed that I wasn't being a good team player. Yeah, the students were taking my class, business law, at other schools, less revenue for the college. What's more important, keeping your standards or keeping the maximized flow of revenue into the school? Well, I found out that all the talk about educational excellence was they're paying lip service to that, but what really mattered was maximizing the number of happy students who would keep paying the tuition. So there's an unintended consequence. More and more students who are weak and disengaged, but they're being kept happy, being kept content with grade inflation. That's not a good thing, in my estimation, but it was happening. These days, after decades and decades of grade inflation, at many schools, A is now the modal grade. Not getting an A is a sign of a cause for remorse among students. And anything less than an A, and then you're likely to have a revolt on your hands. Students who get less than an A, get a C, well, they'll probably go to the dean and complain. And those kinds of complaints are oftentimes met with sympathy. Oh, you're unhappy? Someone gave you a C in a course? Well, we can't have that. The backbone has been removed from educational standards in the United States. So more and more students are taking classes, getting A's and B's and sailing on through and looking like they're doing great. They graduate. Fewer and fewer students wash out. So the number of students graduating is steadily increasing. More and more college graduates. That led to another kind of inflation, credential inflation. Now, suppose you're running a business and you are getting lots and lots of applicants who have college degrees to their name. Now, you're also still getting some applicants who are just high school graduates. But why not use the college degree as a grounds for, let's use it, discrimination? Why bother interviewing people who have only high school educational background when you can fill up your interview schedule and fill up your job openings with college graduates? Why not do that? And to buttress that decision-making, let's go with college degrees, there was a Supreme Court decision in 1971, Griggs versus Duke Power Company, where the Supreme Court ruled against the use of testing and high school graduate requirements for occupational testing. Duke Power Company has said, well, we have certain jobs that we won't consider people for unless they have a high school diploma and have shown their capability on certain aptitude testing. The Supreme Court said that has a disparate impact. Fewer black people than white people have the high school diploma, and fewer black people are able to pass these tests. And unless you can prove that you absolutely have to have people with these levels of background, then you can be sued for disparate impact under the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Act. Well, companies didn't want to be sued, but they found out rather quickly after Griggs versus Duke Power that they could simply say, well, we'll only consider people who have college degrees. There's nothing wrong with that. We don't get sued if we rule out people who have just high school backgrounds. So we now have lots more people going to college, earning college degrees, and now we have companies starting to say, and we won't consider you unless you have a college degree. Here's an example. I have a friend who graduated from high school back in 1974, and he went into the insurance business. And after many years of working in insurance, he finally retired, but he told me that today, I couldn't get hired for the job I've been doing for the last 30 years. Because now my company requires that you have a college degree. I'm no longer qualified for the job I've been doing. We rule out lots and lots of people who could easily learn to do a job like his job in insurance. But the companies are saying, no, we require a college degree. And that feeds back into politics. A lot of politicians took to saying, well, look at the job market. More and more jobs today require a college education. Therefore, we need to do even more for college access. Let's push even more people into college. Let's make it easier and easier to get the loans and grants that people need to get to college, because the economy requires that people have all of these college credentials. President Obama, in one of his earliest pronouncements back in 2009, said that we need to get more people into college because the economy requires that people have college education. In fact, he set a national goal of making the United States the #1 country in the world as far as the percentage of people who have college degrees to their names. He was concerned that we were falling behind a few other countries that had a higher percentage of their people with college degrees. A higher educational attainment became a catchword in the Obama administration. And so it became easier and easier for people to get the money. Then in 2014, another change. Remember all those private loans that were governmentally backed? Obama changed that. Well, Congress changed it at Obama's behest. And we decided we would just have the government make the loans directly. So now we have lots and lots of direct government loans going to more and more people flooding into college. But what are they learning? Well, let's get back to the question of learning and academic standards. Another unanticipated consequence of government interference in higher education was that the curriculum would start to crumble. Now, I already mentioned that academic standards started to fall. And with more and more students coming into college, the college leaders said, they'd be happier if we had fewer courses that were really rigorous and demanding. So what used to be in most schools, you'd have requirements for some college-level math, a calculus-level course at least, and serious lab science. Well, those were hard courses. Lots of students didn't like the hard courses. So at many, many institutions, they were now made optional. Didn't have to take hard courses anymore. But then we could do better than that, just taking out the really hard courses. Why not add some new courses that were kind of fun? So you got an influx of courses, usually at the behest of faculty members who had their own little things they love to talk about, their own little pet projects. And lots of courses were added that were about pop culture kinds of things. So you could get an easy A in some kind of pop culture course on pop rock music, for instance. Many, many courses like this are flooding into the curriculum. Don't have to take hard stuff anymore. More and more of the curriculum is available for students to get relatively easy credits. High school has been pretty much fun and games for most students, so they want college to be the same way. And our educational leaders say, we're okay with that. So rigor is going down. Down, down, down. Hard courses, they're passé. Easy, fun courses, fine, let's have more of those. And at the same time, a lot of faculty members are saying, we would like to teach courses that are politically appealing to us. We would like to institute majors that we think are politically appealing, that we want to talk about, things that we think students should be hearing. And that was the origin, starting back in the 80s and increasing in the 90s, and ever since, we were getting courses and then majors and graduate programs in women's studies, gender studies, Black studies, Hispanic studies, ableism studies. All these studies programs, they're not based on actual bodies of knowledge. They're based mostly on opinion, grievances, but it certainly suited the politicians, at least the politicians who were in power, most of them left-wing oriented politicians, if I can say that. I think I can here. They saw this as a win for them. More and more young people go to college, more and more of them absorbing the messages that they wanted them to be absorbing. Messages about how bad America is, how many grievances you should have, why we need to transform the country. So the left-wing power structure in Washington allies with the left-wing intelligentsia, and we get all of these courses that say nothing good about America. In many colleges today, you will be hard-pressed to find any courses where there's a professor who will say, you know, limited government really worked pretty well for America. Or the capitalist system has worked very well for America. Fewer and fewer professors like that any longer. They have been replaced by ideological zealots who tell their students day in and day out how bad this country is and how it needs to be completely transformed. Throwing aside the Constitution, getting rid of the idea of limited government, letting the bureaucracy do whatever it wants. So these are all bad unintended consequences. Now, this is seeped down also from college into the high school level and below. This is the point made by a Rutgers sociology professor named Jackson Tobey in a book entitled The Lowering of Higher Education that he published some years ago. He points out that in the days when it was difficult to get into college, high schools had to work pretty hard to make sure their students were college ready. But then, what happens when college is open to everybody? High school standards can plunge, and indeed they did. It became easier and easier for people to get through high school without being able to read and write very well, like the students I had when I taught. That has been going on ever since. Now, of course, there are still some high schools that are really rigorous and tough, but in the main, high schools have become easier and easier and easier. You oftentimes hear stories about how in many cities, I heard this recently about Baltimore, very, very few of the high school graduates can even pass a basic aptitude test in math and literacy. But they graduate, standards have plunged. So all of this is really, really depressing. The government has been ruining our educational standards, and at the same time, it's become more and more expensive. Now, this was something that people began to notice back in the 1980s, that college tuition levels were going steadily up much faster than the rate of inflation was. One guy who put his finger on why this was happening was President Reagan's education secretary, William Bennett. In 1987, Bennett wrote an article that was published in the New York Times. He probably wouldn't get that published in the New York Times today, but he did it back then. The article was entitled, "Our Greedy Colleges." And Bennett made the argument that the reason why colleges were charging more and more and more, ratcheting their costs up year after year, was because the government was making more and more money available to students. Student aid was becoming easier to get. And as the cost of college went up, how did the politicians react? They said, oh, look, it's costing more to go to college. If we want to maintain access, we had better make more money available. And of course, the college leaders would say, oh, look, our clients, our customers have more money to spend, let's charge more. So we had the dog chasing its tail phenomenon. More and more money is flooding into student aid, more and more tuition goes up to capture that student aid. So it's getting more and more expensive. And by the year, around 2011, you started hearing these stories about the pathetic kid who had borrowed $100,000 to go to college and get a master's degree in something and was now unemployed. I mentioned 2011 in particular because that was the year Occupy Wall Street made headlines. And it made headlines because most of the OWS leaders were out there chanting about how oppressed they were with college loans. They had no jobs to pay off these loans, and they wanted something done. Now, they didn't get their way immediately, but they set off a clamor for government to make it easier for students to pay off their loans. Well, starting in about, I think it was in 2014, Congress passed some laws to do exactly that, to make it easier for students to pay back. One of the things they did was to pass a law saying that if you had student loans, what you would be expected to pay would be capped based on your income, so that students wouldn't have to suffer and tighten their belt and scrounge for money. It would be capped. If you didn't have any income, you wouldn't have to make any payments. If you had only a low income, you'd have only a low amount of payment. And so we kept access. We kept college affordable by this income-based repayment program. On top of that, though, Congress also, it's so easy to be generous with other people's money, isn't it? They said, and we're going to put a limit on the number of years anyone will be expected to pay. If you've paid in for 20 years, then it's canceled. Your loan, your debt to the taxpayers of America will be canceled after 20 years. Very nice, very generous. A lot of students said, thank you, Uncle Sam. I'll vote for you, you politicians who are behind this. Then, a couple years later, Congress got into the act again, and they said, wait, let's make income repayment even better. We want to encourage people to go into government service, public service jobs. So let's make this law even more generous to college graduates who go into public service. If you work for a nonprofit organization or work for government, then we'll let you off the hook after only 10 years of making payments. Whoa, this is lovely. So we have lots and lots of people racking up a lot of college debt for, let's say, a law degree, and then they go to work as a government lawyer or as a lawyer in some nonprofit organization, and after 10 years, the government says, thank you for your service, and now the rest of your loan is forgiven. Now, of course, the money doesn't disappear. Somebody bore the cost. It's the taxpayers. All this generosity ultimately comes out of the pockets of the taxpayers. But of course, that wasn't enough either. Just this year, the Biden administration said, we're going to use the power of the presidency, an executive order, to declare that people will not have to pay back their loans. That initiative was struck down by the Supreme Court, which said the president does not have this authority under the Constitution or under the law that he cited, the HEROES Act, going back to 2003, and therefore it was declared invalid. Nevertheless, the Biden administration is continuing along these lines, and the Department of Education has announced that it's going to revise these income repayment programs to make them even easier. And this will be challenged, and maybe it'll be struck down. It should be struck down as a violation of the executive branch's powers under the Constitution. But for the time being, some students will probably benefit from it and get out of paying what they owe. So we've created a terrible mess here. If you had gone back to 1965 and asked the politicians, do you intend, by passing this law, that we should make college much, much more expensive and make it much, much less worthwhile educationally? They go, oh, no, of course I don't want that. But that is what has happened. That's the big picture. We've raised the cost enormously. We've decreased its educational value. And in the side door came a lot of political advocacy. We have created a terrible blunder. What should we do? We have a few minutes to talk about that. We should get the government out of student lending. It should never have gotten into student lending. I'm afraid it's here to stay, but if we ever could, this would be a good platform for someone to run on. Eliminating government student aid. It has had terrible consequences in the long run. People who want to go to college can and should fund it through other means than through government. Let them go to people who will have some skin in the game, who will stand to lose if they make a bad loan. Now, apropos of that, there's a pretty good solution that's been advocated for a number of years, but it's never gone anywhere. Why not make the colleges that take student money, student aid money, why not make them responsible? If the students don't repay it, they would have to. They would then have skin in the game. That would change the incentives dramatically. Instead of a game where you want to maximize your revenue by getting as many students as possible in the door and keeping them there, college leaders would now have to say, wait a minute, if we do this and then they can't pay back their loans, it's going to be a hit to us, to our bottom line. And believe me, folks, college leaders love money. Former president of Harvard, Derek Bach, this is the line I've quoted many times, it's a good one. Derek Bach once said, gambling addicts, exiled royalty, and college presidents have one thing in common. There is never enough money. Well, suddenly, if they had skin in the game, college presidents say, wait a minute, let's look at our curriculum. What are we actually doing to create educational value? I know we say we think women's studies and black studies are good programs, but is it going to cost us money if students graduate with degrees in these things and then can't find jobs that will pay back these loans? The curriculum would almost certainly tighten up. And what about admission standards? Will they just let anybody in who can barely read and write? They become much more selective. This might be actually a feasible solution. I know it's been discussed in Congress. Nothing has happened, but there's at least some prospect. Also, another good thing that's starting to happen is smart young people are realizing, I don't need to go to college. I can do things based on what I already know, which might have been learned in high school, might have been learned on their own in many cases. Last year, an intriguing book was published entitled The 1517 Fund. It was written by a guy who runs a fund. He calls it 1517 Fund. What he does is he backs young people who have ambition and ideas and want to go into business or invent something. He says, look, I'll put money behind you, but don't go to college. This is a pretty darn good idea, and it's succeeding. Quite a few young people are taking that road and saying, yeah, I don't need to go to college. I can succeed on my own. And more people are starting to realize college is a poor investment. A lot of years used up, a lot of money borrowed, For what? The idea that college was a great investment, that was unchallenged about 20, 25 years ago. Everyone said, yeah, college is great investment. Borrow as much as you can. It's a good investment. And now people are realizing, wait a minute, it's not. And maybe the government won't forgive our loans. Maybe we should think more carefully about what we're going to do after high school. So there are a few good signs on the horizon, but we're stuck with a very bad status quo. Government money is flooding into people's pockets, and they use it to go to college, where they oftentimes waste 4, 5, 6 years, pile up lots of debts, and are unemployable afterwards. So that's my case. The government has ruined higher education. It would have been fine if we just left it alone, but we did not. So I think that's about my 45 minutes. Any questions or comments? Yes, in the back.
For my 8 or 9 years of teaching, I've just seen that there's an unbelievable deification of college.
Yeah.
Where it's like even among peers, I haven't been at Thales long enough to fully understand the climate here, but I know at previous schools when I've said to students who are just not academically inclined, like, I've got a buddy who fixes HVAC units 3 days a week and he makes $300,000 a year. It's like, this isn't your only option, buddy. Just the insane venom that gets shot your way from many people. It's almost like higher education has become a god of sorts.
Yeah.
How would you kind of recommend, how do you even handle that in a conversation with someone who thinks in that regard? Can you?
You can't. There are a lot of people who are so set in their beliefs, you can't argue with them. If you want to be the skunk at the party with regard to college, you have to expect to be treated like the skunk among many people who think that you're a terrible human being if you say anything derogatory about college. But every now and then you might find somebody who has an open mind and will say, yeah, you make a good point. Let's talk about this. And if you run into those people, send them to the Martin Center's website. We have lots of information that they might put to good use in forming their own opinions. Anybody else? Yes.
In our family, we talk about this a lot. We have an 8th grader, and of course, she wants to go to college. It's the status quo. So my husband and I kind of have the thought that if you're going to go, then you have to go for something very specific.
Yeah.
And come out as that thing. So she thinks she wants to be an architect. Okay, then you go for that and come out with that. Nothing broad like business or English or philosophy. Is it even still worthwhile? Then what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it can be. I've told people for a long time, a college degree is neither necessary nor sufficient for success in America. It is certainly possible for young people to learn on their own what they need to know to be a success in life. Remember the credential inflation problem that I talked about? Well, that is starting to recede. A bunch of large companies have said, look, we're no longer going to evaluate people based on college degrees. We'll evaluate people on what they can demonstrate that they know. So if you've got a young person in your family who can demonstrate ability in, let's say, electronics and computer programming, going to college isn't necessarily the credential that you need any longer. You can look for places where that's not necessary. Or contact the guy who runs the 1517 fund. He might be interested in you. So there are options available for people who are willing to entertain the idea that college isn't the be-all and end-all. It used not to be. If you go back before World War II, some people said, well, yeah, college could be good for you, but You could be a success without going. If you go back earlier than that, go back around to the turn of the previous century, a lot of people in business thought, yeah, college, that ruins a young person. I want someone with drive and ambition, not someone who sat around for 4 years having fun in college.
Right, and you don't want them to come out being a Marxist.
Well, yes. It's more and more difficult for a young person to get through college without hearing day in and day out how bad America is and how we must transform the country. A high percentage of the college professors these days are change agents. They want to indoctrinate their students. That's a problem you can avoid. Is class over? Okay, well, I hope you take one of my little flyers, and you might like to see what I've written, and try the Martin Center's website, and you'll find a lot of good information.